Welcome to another episode of How to Fix It Yourself. Today we're going to be working on a 2001 Pathfinder. We've used this car for other videos, and today the episode we're doing is going to be replacing this. This is the drive motor for the sunroof. Now, I got a few comments that I want to make before we get started. Uh-oh, the window goes down. Now, there's a reason why we did this, and it's important to note. All of the electrical windows in your vehicle are going to be on the same circuit. So if you follow the diagnostic part of your service manual, it's going to be having you check all these fuses, all these relays, all these harnesses, and they're all on the same circuit. And so if your window rolls down, then you don't have to do all that diagnostic to know what's going on with your sunroof. You know that it's the motor, unless there's a break in the harness somewhere, but you'd have to have been in an accident or something for that to have occurred. But you're still gonna have to get up in there to see what's going on. So there's some things you can do to be smart about, doing some of this diagnostic. And the fact that these windows go up and down tells me that all of the relays, all of the fuses, and everything else is good. So we do have to replace that motor. First of all, this particular vehicle is a second half 2001. And that's why it's important to know what your VIN number is, because they made some fairly significant changes between the early 2001s and the later 2001s. So they released two factory service manuals. One is the 2001 service manual, the other is the 2001.5 service manual. And that's the one that goes with this particular car. So we are basing what we're doing on the factory service manual. So just a word to be aware of, that when you go to get parts and when you go to get service manuals and you look things up online, it's always a good idea to have a pretty good idea what your manufacturing date is, or what your, and always you want to know what your VIN number is. Now, with that, having said that, there was a reason. Some of the Nissans in this generation and some of the Infinitis in this generation have an extra pigtail for going into the connector here. And so you pull down the center console, you undo one screw, one bolt, drop it down, the harness comes out, you can unplug it, you plug a new one back in, you stick it back up there, tighten it back up, and you're good to go. Unfortunately, for this particular vehicle, they didn't do that. They made the harness just long enough to go in here when it's bolted up inside. So you can take this down, but you can't get at the harness because of the roof liner. So the factory service manual, if you do it exactly the way the factory service manual wants you to do it, get this, you'll enjoy this. You need to take out the seats, the front seats, you need to take out the back seats, you need to remove all the roof liner items, all the posts on the interior, the headlight or the interior lights, the hand grips, all that stuff has to be removed. Then you drop the entire roof liner and take it out through the back hatch. We're not going to try and do that. Now, if a push comes to shove, we find that we can't quite do what we expect to do, then we may end up having to backtrack a little bit and add some more. But our approach is going to be to remove all of the front half interior supports and all the front half hand grips, lights, center console, and see if we can get that to drop down far enough to where we can sneak the motor out through the front of the headliner, of course without bending or torquing the headliner. Then we can move the motor, put the new one in, slide it back in, and reattach the headliner. Now, a couple of things about this particular headliner. First of all, it's vacuum formed, and so it's very, very stiff. But that means that you don't have a lot of connection points. But around the sunroof, they have these little attachments that are like Velcro. So this is what those Velcro type, and it's not true Velcro, but it has a mating that goes down in and connects with this. And these can be a little bit tricky to undo. So you have to definitely try and pry them apart at the edges. And if you don't, then you're likely to pull it down from the top or pull it down off the headliner, and then you'll need to re-glue it onto either the roof or onto the headliner, whichever part came apart, when you're putting it back together again. So these are a little bit tricky. I'm sure when they were brand new that they popped off fairly easily, but you know, we're not going to have that pleasure because it's a 20-year-old vehicle. The other thing is about these motors. They do go out not real frequently, but fairly frequently, because they sit right in the roof here in front, where it gets an awful lot of heat. And so a lot of times the electronics or the electronics will fry because of the heat, or they'll not work anymore. That's my guess as to what's happened to this one. It's run very well for 18 years. A couple of years ago it stopped working, and now we're going to go ahead and do the replacement. In general, the stuff we're doing, while it's specific to the Pathfinder, it's fairly general to any vehicle that has a sunroof or an opening moonroof. Usually the sunroofs open, the moonroofs don't. And they're going to have different motors, but they're all going to operate basically the same, and it's going to be the same program to fix or replace those on almost any car. So this will be a good video to watch to see how to do it, even if it's not on a Pathfinder. All right, so with that intro, I think we're ready to get going. We're going to start disassembling the interior of the vehicle. We'll show you bits and pieces of that where it's difficult, to make sure you have a good idea of how these come apart. And you know, we're not necessarily going to show you every single step, but we'll show you every important step, and we'll show it to you carefully and closely, so as it's easy to understand what's going on and how to do it. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the center console. Now, the harness that controls the motor also comes here, because these are the two switches that control the motor for the sunroof. So there's a Phillips #2 that's up here, and then there's two Phillips #2s that are in this area here. So we're going to go ahead and remove those and drop this panel and disconnect the wire harness. Now, just as my personal bias is that I just put on a brand new tip. Bits and inserts are cheap relative to chewing out a screw and potentially having to drill things out and all that. So it's cheap to go ahead and put on a brand new bit. So whenever I do things like this, I always make sure I have a brand new bit, so we get a good attachment and are able to remove the screws without tearing up the heads. So after we remove the one screw, the other thing that's holding this on is 4 metal clips. So we've already popped this side loose. Again, use trim tools so you're not damaging things. Kind of go ahead and get in there and kind of, so these are good metal clips, I'll tell you. There it goes. And then the last one we should be able to just take out. Okay, so that, now here you can see where the motor is, and the harness is back here in this corner here. So we need to remove all the clips that are holding this assembly together up here. So we'll go ahead and remove that one. We'll go ahead and remove that one. And of course they all have little tabs on the top that you have to press to hold them up. So now when we get ready to put the new motor in, we'll have to reconnect this and operate these switches to make sure that we get the motor set. So it learns how much it needs to go in order to tilt it up, how much it needs to go back and front. So that's removing that. Then again, we need to take this off. We've got one more screw we couldn't get at while that was on there. Now that we've taken the screws out, that'll take the mirror off, and that will give us access to all of this front area here in terms of being able to remove the panel. So when you remove the sunshades, remember that you're going to have a harness up under the far sides that you're going to have to disconnect. With the one on the driver's side, you'll have a mirror with lights on it, and with the buttons for opening garage doors. On the one on the passenger side, you'll just have the harness for the light for the mirror. We're now pulling the sun visor from the driver's side of the car. You'll notice that we've got a couple of screws that need to be removed, and we've also got a plastic cover that's got to pop off. So we remove now the screw that goes to the right side holder on the driver's side, and there's 2 screws and a harness. So we'll pop those 2 screws out of there, drop the harness down, and this is the clip that we need to unfasten. The next thing we're going to do is remove the front post cover. Now the front post cover has 2 metal spring clips that just pop out. Now when they get this old, you've got to be really careful in popping those out because the plastic is brittle. So we need to pull down the weather stripping there off of the front side. We're not going to take it completely off. We're just going to pull it down a little bit, as you see. Now you'll notice that that gives us more room to pull down the roof liner. And now that we're looking at it, it looks like we've got enough slack in the roof liner to where we might be able to get that motor out without doing much more disassembly. It looks like we're going to pull the motor out through the opening for the sunroof rather than towards the windshield like we originally talked about at the first of the film. So we've got this metal support bracket that's kind of in the way for getting the motor out. I think we could loosen the screws and go ahead and pull it down a little bit to get it out of there. But I think the wisest thing to do is go ahead and remove the bracket entirely. So it's held on by 4 screws. They're a little awkward, so we're going to use a universal on a 1/4-inch drive to take those off. And so that's what we're doing now. We can now get at the motor. You'll notice it's still pretty tight coming out the front of the sunroof opening, but we can get at it. I'll use a small little screwdriver for the top to uncouple it and to pull it out of there. And so now you see that we have it free, and we've now got the motor out of there. We snap the motor in place and have the harness in place. We've now attached the upper console on this gray pin because these are the ones that go to the motor controllers. Now, according to the service manual, the sunroof has to be closed, which it is. And then we run the motor on the closed position until it stops on both the tilt and the slide mechanism. So I've never done this before, so we're going to see what happens. So I now have the key in. I've got the it turned on. The windows at the door work. So now we're going to see what happens here. Okay. So it's not going anywhere, and it's not going anywhere. So I'm presuming that it's in place and we're good. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and screw the motor in place and then see if everything's working. So we're now going to put those screws in place. Now we're putting the mounting screws in to put the motor in place. And we're going to just kind of snug it up in there because things will have to slide just a little bit to make sure the gears mesh properly. Oops. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and see if the motor runs. And sure enough, there it slides back properly. Closes properly, tilts up properly, and tilts down properly. So our replacing the motor was the right thing to do. We now know that it works. So now we just have to reverse our procedures and put everything back together again. So before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and remove this connector so that we can, because this control will be the last thing that goes in place, and so that we can now put this on last, because this is the last piece to go on. So now we'll just reverse our procedures, and as I look at our roof lining, I don't see that we've done any real damage to it, so when it all goes back in place, it should look pretty good. So you can see we've got everything back together again. We did have a couple of things that didn't go well, which is expected in an older car like this. We did break a couple of the metal clips that slide in just because the plastic was weaker than the clip was. And so we do have to make some repairs. One part we might have to buy, but that's what happens when you do things. You know, it just often things will go sideways a little bit on an older car. But as you can see, we were very careful and we have it all back together again. Everything works well. Everything looks fine. It looks very professional. It doesn't look like we've damaged anything. So this is what can happen if you take your time, you're careful, and you follow instructions, and you try to be precise in what you do. Of course, the ultimate test is, does the sunroof now work when everything's all put together? So I'll go ahead and open the sunroof. All right, so hopefully we've demonstrated how to have a successful project doing a sunroof motor replacement. Soon in one of our videos coming up, we'll talk about how to grease and oil and clean up the tracks on your sunroof so you can finish up having a good, smooth operating sunroof. We hope you've enjoyed this video. Please click the subscribe button if you haven't. Click the like button, and then the tools and items that we've used will be listed below. Please use those links to purchase anything you need for doing work on your projects. Hopefully you've had a good time with this. We certainly have, and we learned a lot. Hope you've learned a lot. Take care.